Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I want to speak to the person who walked out of a toxic relationship carrying scraps of themselves, hoping, begging, searching for something that feels like closure, validation, or accountability. I want to speak to the one whose heart still trembles when they think about the way things ended, who still feels the sting of being misunderstood, mistreated, or dismissed. And I especially want to speak to the one who's tempted, right now, to reach out and ask the very question that will only reopen the wound. When you seek closure from a toxic person, you are unknowingly placing your heart back into the hands of the very person who mishandled it. It feels innocent, even necessary. You want answers, clarity, truth, acknowledgement. But the moment you reach out and ask, "Why did you treat me this way?" Or, "Did you ever care?" you shift the power dynamic back to where it was when you were hurting the most. Toxic individuals thrive on confusion, on emotional imbalance, on maintaining just enough control to keep you doubting yourself. Your request for closure becomes their opportunity to influence your healing in a way that keeps you tied to them emotionally. Even after the relationship has ended, the confusion they created during the relationship becomes the same confusion they offer you at the end. Instead of giving you truth, they give ambiguity. Instead of clarity, they give contradictions. Instead of accountability, they give excuses or silence. They might even respond in a way that makes you question your own reality all over again, just like you did when you were still with them. A toxic person does not want closure because closure means finality, boundaries, and the end of their emotional hold on you. They prefer loose ends, open emotional wounds, and unanswered questions, not because they love you, but because it keeps them relevant in your emotional world. When you reach out for closure, you walk right back into the dynamic where they held the power. In that moment, you are no longer standing in your strength. You are standing in your longing. You are standing in your pain. And they sense that vulnerability. Toxic people know how to use your emotional desire for understanding as a way to regain influence. They may string you along with half-truths, vague answers, or even sudden warmth. They may pretend to reflect, pretend to care, or pretend they are willing to talk, not out of genuine remorse, but to maintain just enough connection so that you don't fully detach. And if they don't respond at all, the silence becomes another form of power. You sit there waiting, hoping, hurting, wondering that emotional limbo benefits them, not you. It reactivates the same self-doubt, anxiety, and overthinking that kept you stuck throughout the relationship. In seeking closure, you unintentionally give them the opportunity to reopen every wound you've been trying to heal. You make yourself vulnerable to the same emotional destabilization that exhausted you, drained you, and broke you. You might believe that hearing their explanation will free you, but toxic individuals don't offer explanations that liberate you. They offer explanations that confuse you further or absolve themselves. They spin narratives that make them look like the victim, and you like the overreactor. They might blame your emotions, your standards, your expectations. They might gaslight you subtly or overtly. And even if they admit something, it will never be full accountability. It will be carefully crafted to make them look better than they were, and you doubt yourself more than you should. This is why asking them for closure is not a moment of clarity. It is a moment of surrender. It gives them the psychological authority to define what happened, to shape the story, to influence your healing. And someone who couldn't honor you in the relationship will not honor you in the ending. Their words will not heal you. They will destabilize you. Their explanations will not empower you. They will drain you. Their version of the truth will not match your lived experience, and the emotional mismatch will hurt far more deeply than you anticipate. The truth is, this closure from a toxic person is a myth. Waiting for it is a trap. Asking for it is a wound reopening. Toxic individuals keep you trapped not by physical presence, but by emotional confusion. And closure is the hook they use to keep you circling back emotionally. Every time you extend your reach, you give them another moment of power. Every time you seek understanding, you give them another opportunity to distort the narrative. Every time you ask, why, you place your healing in the hands of someone who never protected your heart in the first place. Closure does not come from the person who broke you. It comes from the moment you decide they no longer have access to your emotional world. It comes from recognizing that the relationship ended because they were incapable of meeting you where you stood. It comes from understanding that no explanation they could give would change what happened. The closure you're looking for is not in their words. It's in your silence. It's in your acceptance. It's in your forward movement. Because the moment you stop asking them for answers is the moment you reclaim your power. And the moment your true healing finally begins. Toxic partners cannot give you the truth, validation, or accountability you're desperately searching for after the relationship ends. And understanding this is one of the most liberating, painful, and necessary realizations you will ever experience. When you walk away from someone who drained you emotionally, who manipulated your empathy, who twisted your reality, it is natural to crave answers. You want them to acknowledge your pain. You want them to finally see what you went through. You want them to realize how deeply they hurt you. And you want, just once, for them to be honest with you. But toxic people do not operate from a place of emotional integrity. They do not process relationships the way healthy people do. They do not self-reflect, self-correct, or hold themselves accountable. They protect their ego at all costs, even when that means rewriting the entire relationship to make themselves look like the victim or the hero. What you're hoping for requires emotional maturity, and emotional maturity requires humility. It requires introspection. It requires the ability to say, I messed up, I hurt you, or I should have treated you better. But toxic individuals cannot go there, because acknowledging their wrongdoing threatens the delicate, fragile image they hold of themselves. They construct their identity through denial, projection, and avoidance. If they admit your pain is real, then they must also admit that they caused it. And to them, that level of emotional responsibility feels like annihilation. So instead of facing it, they deflect it. When you ask a toxic person why they did what they did, they don't answer from truth. They answer from self-preservation. They twist the story so your pain becomes an exaggeration, your emotions become overreactions, and your memories become distorted. If you say, you hurt me, they say, you're too sensitive. If you say, you lied, they say, you misunderstood. If you say, you ignored me, they say, you wanted too much. They turn your valid emotional experiences into flaws, not because they believe their own lies, but because admitting the truth threatens the version of themselves they need to survive. This is why you cannot receive closure from them. Closure requires the ability to acknowledge impact. Toxic partners lack that ability because they fear accountability more than they fear losing you. They don't operate from empathy. They operate from ego. They are driven by protecting their image, not protecting your heart. Even if they seem calm or detached, they are emotionally fragile underneath. So fragile that one moment of honesty feels impossible for them to tolerate. Their emotional limitations become the cage you get trapped in when you seek explanations. When you want to talk about your pain, they either shut down, get defensive, or disappear entirely. When you want to understand what went wrong, they rewrite the narrative so that you become the problem. When you want healing, they create more hurt. When you want to close the wound, they reopen it. Not because they hate you, but because they cannot handle looking at the truth of their own behavior. You are asking for a depth they do not possess. You are asking for empathy from someone who's disconnected from their own emotions. You are asking for maturity from someone who stopped growing emotionally long before they met you. You are asking for clarity from someone who thrives in emotional fog. And you are asking for understanding from someone who has spent their whole life refusing to understand themselves. Even if they do respond, their words won't heal you. Their explanations won't make sense. Their logic will be circular. Their apologies, if offered, will be shallow, inconsistent, or weaponized. They won't say, I damaged you. They'll say, you're remembering wrong. You caused it. Or, it wasn't that serious. They won't acknowledge your suffering because doing so requires self-awareness, and toxic individuals avoid self-awareness like a flame. The truth you are seeking will never come from them. It will come from recognizing that you are asking a spiritually an emotionally blind person to describe the harm they caused. They cannot give you what they do not have, and waiting for them to say the words you need to hear only keeps you chained to their emotional dysfunction. You cannot receive accountability from someone who runs from accountability. You cannot receive validation from someone who invalidates everything, including themselves. Freedom begins the moment you stop expecting emotional maturity from someone who does not possess it. Healing begins the moment you stop asking a toxic heart to confirm the reality your soul already knows. And peace begins the moment you stop trying to extract empathy from a person who never learned how to feel it. Asking why after a toxic relationship doesn't give you clarity. It throws you right back into the same emotional maze you spent months or years trying to escape. When you ask a toxic partner to explain their behavior, you think you're reaching for peace, but what you're truly doing is reaching for logic in a place where logic never existed. You're hoping the person who created the confusion will suddenly become the one who clarifies it. You're hoping the person who twisted your reality will untwist it. You're hoping that the person who hurt you deeply will suddenly feel compelled to be honest, gentle, or accountable. But toxic people thrive on distortion. Confusion is their comfort zone. Lack of clarity is their weapon. And asking them why is an invitation for them to pull you back into the emotional fog they built. You need to understand something extremely important. Toxic people don't explain their behavior. They justify it. They don't reflect on the pain they caused. They defend themselves against it. They don't hear your questions as a request for honesty. They hear them as an opportunity to rewrite the narrative. When you ask them why they did what they did, you're not opening a door to closure. You're opening a door to manipulation. You're handing them emotional access to you at the very moment you're most vulnerable. And they will use that access the same way they used it inside the relationship to maintain control, avoid accountability, and keep you emotionally destabilized. The reason asking why keeps you stuck is because toxic people cannot give you answers rooted in truth. They give you answers rooted in ego. Their responses won't be explanations. They will be distortions designed to protect themselves. They'll tell you they acted out because of your tone, your reactions, your expectations, your sensitivity. They'll make you believe you were too much or not enough. They'll turn your valid hurt into perceived emotional weakness. Every answer they give will be structured to shift responsibility onto you. And the moment you hear it, even if a part of you knows it's wrong, you begin to question yourself again. The very self-doubt you work to escape begins creeping back in. This is the cycle. You ask for clarity. They give you confusion. You internalize the confusion. They walk away feeling justified. And you're left feeling like you still need answers. Asking for closure from a toxic person is like trying to clean a wound with dirty hands. You make the infection worse. And you walk away believing the pain is your fault. But here's the truth you must hold tightly. Your desire for clarity is not the problem. Your desire for understanding is not the problem. Your desire for answers is not the problem. The problem is where you're seeking those answers from. You're asking someone who was incapable of loving you properly to suddenly communicate properly. You're asking someone who lied during the relationship to tell you the truth afterward. You're asking someone who avoided responsibility to suddenly embrace accountability. You're asking someone who lacked self-awareness to give you emotional insight. You're asking someone who functioned through manipulation to offer you emotional integrity. And no matter how much you wish it, they cannot give you that. When you ask why, your heart is hoping for healing, but your mind is walking into the same emotional trap. The trap where they shift blame. The trap where they invalidate your experience. The trap where they minimize the damage. The trap where they pretend the relationship wasn't as toxic as it truly was. The trap where they twist your memories just enough to make you doubt yourself again. The trap where you walk away feeling emptier than before. You are not meant to understand their behavior through their words. You are meant to understand it through their patterns. Patterns don't lie. Patterns don't distort. Patterns don't gaslight. Patterns don't shift blame. Patterns tell the truth. even when their mouth does not. The relationship itself already gave you the answer you're trying to extract verbally. They treated you poorly because that is how they operate. They hurt you because they lack emotional accountability. They confused you because confusion is how they maintain control. They dismissed you because they cannot meet emotional depth. They broke you because they are broken themselves. The explanation is in the experience, not in their excuses. When you ask, why, you reopen emotional doors that were meant to stay closed. You hand them the opportunity to confuse you again, hurt you again, or minimize your truth again. But the truth is already in your hands. You already know why it ended. You already felt the answer in your spirit long before your mind wanted to accept it. The moment you stop asking the person who broke you to explain why they broke you is the moment in healing becomes unstoppable. You reclaim your clarity, your power, and your emotional truth the moment you stop looking for answers in the very place where honesty never lived. What you truly want after a toxic relationship ends isn't closure, it's acknowledgement. You want your pain to be recognized. You want your tears to be understood. You want your effort to be seen. You want the heartbreak you endured to be validated by the very person who caused it. And beneath all of that, you want to hear one sentence that feels like oxygen after months of suffocating. You didn't deserve what I did to you. But toxic people cannot give you this. Not because you don't deserve it, but because they are incapable of offering the emotional accountability you crave. Their psychology doesn't allow it. Their ego doesn't tolerate it. Their identity depends on avoiding it. And so you end up reaching out for something they cannot give, a moment of truth you will never receive from the source of your suffering. This is why you feel stuck. This is why moving on feels so difficult. You're not waiting for closure. You're waiting for a breakthrough that will never come. You're waiting for a moment when they wake up, feel remorse, and finally honor the truth of what you lived through. You're waiting for a conversation where they admit they lied, manipulated, neglected, or mistreated you. You're waiting for them to validate what you felt in your body, your mind, and your spirit during the relationship. The moments when something inside you knew the connection was hurting you, even when you stayed because your heart was loyal. You want them to acknowledge the emotional destruction they caused, not because you want revenge, but because your heart wants alignment. You want your internal truth and their external words to finally match. You want the emotional puzzle to make sense. You want the story to feel complete. So you try to pull that acknowledgement from them, thinking that hearing it will free you. You think their recognition will release the weight you've been carrying. You think their clarity will heal the wound, but it won't, because they are incapable of giving the one thing that would finally set you free: accountability. Toxic individuals avoid responsibility the way a flame avoids water, instinctively, urgently, automatically. Accountability requires them to confront their own darkness. It requires them to admit they are not as innocent, caring, or evolved as they pretend to be. It requires them to dismantle the narrative they've built around themselves. A narrative where always right, always justified, always the victim. To acknowledge your pain is to acknowledge their part in causing it, and their ego cannot tolerate that level of self-awareness. So instead, they either dismiss your pain or distort the story entirely. This is why they minimize what happened. This is why they act like you're exaggerating. This is why they pretend they don't remember things clearly. This is why they make you doubt your feelings, your reactions, and your memories. They are protecting something, not the relationship, not you, but their own identity. Their validation would require honesty, responsibility, and humility. And these are emotional muscles they have never developed, because developing them would mean confronting who they really are. So you keep reaching for acknowledgement, and every time you reach, you're met with silence, deflection, excuses, or manipulation. And each time that happens, it deepens the wound. Because now you're not only hurt by what they did, you're hurt by their refusal to admit it. This is why the ending feels so heavy. The lack of acknowledgement becomes another layer of pain you weren't prepared for. You wanted closure, but what you needed was respect for your experience. You needed recognition of your emotional reality. You needed them to take responsibility. And when they didn't, you internalized the absence of accountability as a reflection of your worth. But here is the truth your heart must cling to. Their inability to validate you is not a reflection of your value. It is a reflection of their limitations. You are asking for emotional insight from someone who can't even face their own emotions. You are asking for maturity from someone stuck in emotional childhood. You are asking for truth from someone who hides behind lies to survive. You are asking for empathy from someone who has never learned what empathy feels like. What you want is not impossible, but it is impossible from them. The acknowledgement you seek is the acknowledgement you must give yourself. The truth you wish they would speak is the truth you already know internally. The validation you desire is the validation you must offer to your own heart. Your hurt was real. Your tears were real. Your confusion was real. And your pain deserves to be honored by someone capable of empathy. And that someone is you. The moment you stop trying to pull accountability from a heart incapable of offering it, you stop reopening the wound. You stop giving your healing away. You stop depending on the very person who broke you to be the one who fixes you. You begin to reclaim your story, your truth, and your power, not because they finally acknowledge what they did, but because you did. Silence is one of the most powerful forms of closure, yet it feels like the hardest one to choose. When a toxic relationship ends, every part of you wants to speak, explain, defend, demand, or understand. Your heart wants answers. Your mind wants clarity. Your soul wants acknowledgement. But the moment you stop asking, stop chasing, stop reaching out, and choose silence instead, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your silence becomes the boundary you were never allowed to have. It becomes the truth they can't rewrite. It becomes the ending they cannot manipulate. It becomes the moment you reclaim control over your emotional world after giving it away for far too long. Toxic people always expect access. They expect you to keep explaining yourself. They expect you to keep apologizing for their behavior. They expect you to keep trying to fix what they broke. They expect you to ask questions and seek resolution because it keeps them in a position of emotional power. As long as you are reaching out, they feel validated. As long as you're trying to understand them, they feel relevant. As long as you're still emotionally tangled, they feel like they haven't truly lost you. Your chase becomes their reassurance. But silence removes all reassurance. It removes their ability to influence your emotions. It removes their ability to distort the ending. It removes their opportunity to confuse you again. Silence is not passive. Silence is not weak. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is power. Silence is a statement. I no longer need anything from you. And for a toxic person who thrived on your emotional availability, that statement hits harder than any confrontation ever could. Silence is closure because it forces them to face what they never thought possible, that they don't have access to you anymore. You are no longer emotionally reachable. You are no longer someone they can manipulate. You are no longer someone they can guilt, charm, confuse, or destabilize. You are not feeding the cycle anymore. And when there is no cycle, there is no relationship. Toxic connections depend on emotional conflict, reconciliation, hope, disappointment, pain, reset. Your silence breaks that cycle permanently. It starves the dynamic that once drained you. This silence doesn't just affect them. It transforms you. Silence gives you emotional distance. Distance gives you clarity. Clarity gives you truth, and truth gives you healing. When you stop engaging with a toxic person, your nervous system finally stops entering fight or flight mode. You are no longer waiting for the next argument, the next cold response, the next manipulation, the next breadcrumb. Your heart finally gets a break from the emotional roller coaster. In the quiet, something you haven't felt in a long time begins to rise: your own voice, your own intuition, your own worth. You start realizing you don't actually need their explanation to move on. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need their validation to confirm what you lived through. You begin to see the relationship for what it was, not through the lens of their excuses. You stop remembering the fantasy you held onto and start remembering the reality you survived. And most importantly, you stop hoping they will change into the person you needed them to be. Silence allows you to grieve not just the relationship, but the version of you that tolerated it. Silence is closure because it closes the emotional loop inside you. When you stop going back to the source of your pain for healing, you stop reopening the wound. You stop hoping for change that will never come. You stop craving understanding from someone who lacks self-awareness. You stop living in emotional limbo. You finally begin to move forward. That movement, that shift, is the real closure you've been chasing. And while your silence frees you, it often unsettles them. They didn't expect you to walk away quietly. They didn't expect you to choose peace over chaos. They didn't expect you to let go without asking for answers. Toxic people interpret silence as loss of control, and that loss shakes them far more than any conversation ever could. Your silence becomes the only moment they truly realize they cannot reach you the way they used to. But your silence is not about them. It's about you reclaiming your story. It's about protecting your healing. It's about honoring your truth. It's about choosing self-respect over emotional dependency. Closure was never something they were meant to give you. Closure is the moment you choose yourself without needing anything from the person who broke you. Silence is where that choice becomes undeniable. Silence is where your power returns home. True healing begins not when they explain the ending, but when you decide the ending no longer defines you. And this realization is what finally breaks the emotional spell of a toxic relationship. For so long, you believed the closure you needed lived in their hands. You believed that if they said the right words, admitted the truth, or showed remorse, the pain inside you would dissolve. You believed their acknowledgement would validate your worth, your effort, your suffering. But the moment you stop waiting for them to deliver something they were never capable of giving, you take back the authority over your own story. Healing is not a gift they hand you. It is a decision you make for yourself. The truth is, closure does not come from understanding why they hurt you. Closure comes from understanding why you stayed, why you cared, why you tolerated what you tolerated, and why you are choosing something different now. Closure is not about them admitting fault. It's about you admitting the truth of your experience. They don't need to tell you they were toxic for you to know it. They don't need to acknowledge the emotional damage for it to be real. They don't need to explain their behavior for you to know none of it was your responsibility. Their silence or denial does not erase the truth. You lived it. You survived it. You carry the memories in your spirit, and those memories are enough to understand what the relationship truly was. Healing begins when you realize you don't need their side of the story to complete the narrative. You already have everything you need. You have the nights you cried alone. You have the moments you begged for honesty and were met with silence. You have the times you tried to communicate and they shut down or lashed out. You have the emotional exhaustion, the confusion, the gaslighting, the cycles of hope and disappointment. You have the evidence of what this relationship did to you. You don't need their words to put the puzzle together. You lived every piece of it. The ending doesn't define you unless you allow it to. The heartbreak does not become your identity unless you hold on to it. Toxic people often want you to internalize their behavior as a reflection of your worth. But it wasn't. Anything they lacked was a reflection of their emotional limitations, not your emotional value. When you stop seeking their validation, you stop giving them power over your identity. You stop making their denial mean something about you. You stop making their inability to love mean you are unlovable. You stop making their absence mean you are easy to leave. You begin to see that everything they couldn't give says everything about them and nothing about your worthiness of real love. Healing begins when you separate their behavior from your value. When you understand that you were not broken, you were betrayed. You were not too much, they were too little. You were not unworthy, they were unavailable. You were not asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. This shift is the moment you begin to rise again. Because healing, at its core, is realizing your story doesn't end with how someone else mistreated you. That was a chapter, not the whole book. When you decide the ending no longer defines you, you regain the power to redefine what comes next. You stop telling yourself that this experience ruined you and start telling yourself that this experience revealed you. Your strength, your resilience, your capacity to love deeply, your courage to walk away even when you still cared. Pain becomes insight. Wounds become wisdom. Scars become strength. You begin to realize that the relationship didn't break you. It broke the parts of you that needed to break, so you could rebuild differently, stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. And as you heal, you no longer see the toxic person as the source of the closure you needed. You begin to understand that you close the story by choosing not to let it define your self-worth, your future relationships, or your emotional identity. You stop waiting for their apology because you no longer need it. You stop replaying the ending because it doesn't control you anymore. You stop hoping they recognize your worth because you finally recognize it yourself. Their silence no longer wounds you. Their denial no longer destabilizes you. Their absence no longer empties you. When you decide the ending no longer defines you, something extraordinary happens. You define yourself. You choose who you become after the pain, and that choice is more powerful than any closure a toxic person could ever give.